Joseph Grenny is co-author of the bestseller Influence, The Power to Change Anything, and is co-founder of Vital Smarts, which teaches organizations how to communicate effectively. He's in South Africa and he's here in the Summit Studios. Good to have you, Joseph.
Good to be with you, Erica.
Now, Joseph, what are the biggest killers of effective communication?
Well, most of it is that we're unskilled at having crucial conversations. So when people are having to deal with difficult issues, often they don't know how to say something. If you have a boss, for example, who's making decisions that you think are probably going to tank the company and ruin everything, people often let those things carry on for far too long because they don't know how to speak up. It's a skill gap.
But aside from skill, what about fear and just our human brokenness?
Yeah, the fear is a huge issue as well. Oftentimes when we get into conditions of emotional interpersonal stress, our body starts to react. So physiologically we're ill prepared because adrenaline, when it starts to get into our system when we're feeling threatened, shuts our brain down. And so we look dumb because we are dumb. We're actually functioning at about 50% capacity. So crucial conversations are a really critical part of creating change. But the whole notion of influence is there's a lot more than just conversations trying to create change as well.
So that relates to my next question. How do we break that cycle? And your 3 bestsellers, and you've co-authored more than that, but Crucial Conversations, Crucial Confrontations, and The Influencer.
Yeah. Influence is really about everything beyond just talking about change. So we were studying, for example, a very successful restaurateur who's created this culture in his organization where all of the employees are hyper attentive to taking care of all of the guests and creating unique experiences for them. And how you create that kind of culture in an organization is what influence is all about. How you create this distinguishing, highly productive, high-quality organizational culture where people behave in ways that add value is sort of the ultimate question of business.
What's the difference then between influencing and controlling?
Oh, my goodness. Everything in the world, controlling tends to provoke a reaction. So when people feel controlled, when people's autonomy is threatened, they tend to resist that, and they undermine it. They tend to sort of get you back. When you're influencing effectively, it's voluntary, it's committed. People are behaving in ways that they choose to behave, and really good influencers know how to do that.
Is it all about leadership?
Leadership is influence. So if leaders don't understand all of the sources of influence to create behavior change, then they aren't very good leaders. They may sit in a big office, they may have a lot of resources, but they need a theory of influence, a theory of how to create behavior change in an organization, or else they aren't truly leaders.
What if the leader is absent, as you say, not truly a leader, and in one's workplace, which might be a toxic workplace? How does one go about influencing that?
So if I were in the middle of an organization and I needed to influence change, the influencer model works precisely the same. You need to be able to use all 6 sources of influence. You need to be able to create kind of a sense of moral change. You need to build skills. You need to build social support. You need to create incentives. And people even from the middle of an organization can rally these sources of influence to try to support positive change. I was at Robben Island just this last weekend sitting outside Nelson Mandela's cell. And you think if somebody from a jail cell can influence profound change across a nation and across a planet, what can't we do from the middle of an organization?
Well, that probably relates to what I want to ask you. Because a lot of these relationships and influences that you refer to, they're personal, they're very close, interpersonal, even though I think what you're implying, it ramifies across society. But how does one influence an entire society? How does one influence government? How does one reduce crime?
Yeah, well, when we undertook this influencer study, we traveled literally around the world to find those who had influenced huge changes across huge nationalities. So one in Thailand, for example, a man by the name of Dr. Wiwat Rajanapithayakorn reduced the number of new AIDS infections by 90% within 2 years across an entire nation. And he did that because he understood how to think about creating behavior change across that society. All 6 of these sources of influence were critical in that effort. He had to create a sense of moral outrage. He needed tactics to do that. He had to create skills because people who are trying to avoid creating an AIDS problem have to be able to have skills in those moments where they're making difficult decisions about those choices that will help them to succeed. They need social support. We need to change norms. We need incentives to try to support that. And we also need an environment that provides tools and support for people that are doing this. So there were a whole set of strategies that were required, and most people just use 1 or 2, which is why most leadership efforts fail.
I'm going to ask you a dangerous question now. You're an outsider. You've been to South Africa before. You've had some interaction with South Africans. In what way, can one generalize about the way in which South Africans communicate, or confrontations and conversations we should be having?
Yeah, I'll sort of broaden it. I see in a lot of countries that there are patterns of silence for sustained periods of time where people don't speak up about the things that concern them, and then they erupt in violence. And if people don't find a way to create healthy dialogue, to have crucial conversations early on in an effective way, then that's what tends to occur. We suppress, and then boom, we have violence. So if you have people who are not part of the democratic conversation, they need to be engaged in healthy ways far earlier on, or you get social unrest.
And is that how you would explain what we see in South Africa?
I think it is. I think that we have people who are not part of that conversation, and in their powerlessness, eventually erupt in more violent expression.
So how does one, as a social player, an economic player, make those changes?
I think that oftentimes people need skills, that people need to know that different than the culture we may have been brought up in, that taught us to express ourselves in ineffective ways or not speak up at all when we're talking to people in positions of authority, that there are ways of expressing ourselves that are healthy, that are effective, that are candid, and that can produce change.
What about age differences? I would imagine that the baby boomers communicate differently and react differently from the Generation X and the Y and the millennials. Yes.
Yeah, and I do think that technology is actually probably setting us back. So people are finding excuses to not have crucial conversations with those they need to address. We text people. My own daughters texted a boyfriend to break up with them. And I talked to them afterwards and said, how can you do this if you've been going out with somebody for months and months and months, and that's it? That's the way you deal with some of these really difficult emotional moments for people. But that's how this generation seems to be addressing some of its concerns, and it could be a problem.
I'm going to give you a practical example and see how you would resolve it. Imagine if you're in a workplace and you work with someone, say, who's very sulky, this sort of passive-aggressive behavior, and it's poisoning the work environment. How does one react?
Yeah, we talk about that one of the challenges in crucial conversations is having the right conversation. Frequently what happens is we have what we call content conversations rather than patterns. So if you say this person has been sulky and that they're sort of disaffected or disengaged for long periods of time, usually what happens is we wait until a specific incident occurs, and then we bring up that incident in a really angry and upset way. This is a bad way to do it for two reasons. The first is you shouldn't wait till you're emotionally upset to talk about things. You should schedule a special time to talk. The second is when you focus just on what happened now, you aren't having the right conversation. You're talking about the content, the incident, what specifically occurred, when your real issue is a pattern of them being sulky. So you need to schedule a special time, talk to them about, boy, over a period of months, I see you addressing some of our customers or some of your colleagues in this kind of a way. We need to talk about this, and I'd like to develop a strategy to help you to respond differently to that. So that's a pattern conversation, which is far different than you just mistreated a customer or how come you didn't answer my phone call. Yes. The two are different entirely.
And also it takes time.
Well, you have to schedule time so you can do it in an unrushed and a safe way for people.
Joseph, what are you working on now?
The next book is called Change Anything, The New Science of Personal Success. We did a study of 5,000 people who were struggling with personal change challenges like losing weight or changing spending habits or changing how they relate to other people and struggling to overcome these challenges. We found 500 who'd made enormous changes in their own habits, and we tried to find the keys to success. So that will be our next book.
Joseph, thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you here, and we look forward to that next book of yours.
Appreciate the conversation.
Joseph Grenny, he's a author and co-founder of Vital Smarts.